Sign it over to me now, before you're too senile to know what you're doing." Those words came from my own son's mistress, standing in my living room like she owned the place. What I did next with my fortune left my entire family in absolute shock. "I'm grateful you're here with me today. Stay until the very end and drop a comment telling me which country you're watching from. I want to see how far this message travels." At 70 years old, I thought I understood greed. I'd watched it destroy business partnerships, and friendships, and fracture families through my late husband's years in commercial real estate. But I never imagined I'd see it consume my own son, turning him into someone I barely recognized. Standing in my kitchen that Sunday afternoon, listening to them scheme about my assets like I was already dead, I realized something fundamental had shifted in my world. My name is Eleanor Catherine Whitmore, though most people in Ashford Heights still call me Ellie. For the past 49 years, I've lived in the same Queen and Victorian house on Silverbrook Lane, a sprawling 3-story beauty with turrets, wraparound porches, and stained glass windows that cast rainbows across the hardwood floors when the afternoon sun hits just right. My late husband, Thomas Whitmore, and I purchased this house in 1976 for $38,000. We were young then, barely in our 30s, with a toddler son and dreams bigger than our modest savings account. Thomas had just started his commercial real estate firm, working 18-hour days to build something lasting. I'd been a high school English teacher, grading papers at the kitchen table late into the night while our son Benjamin slept upstairs. Those early years were hard. Money was tight. The house needed constant repairs, leaking roof, temperamental furnace, outdated electrical wiring that sparked dangerously. But we were happy. We had each other, we had Benjamin, and we had this beautiful old house that we were slowly bringing back to life. Thomas's business eventually flourished. By the mid-1980s, Whitmore Properties had become one of the most respected commercial real estate firms in the Tri-County area. We developed shopping centers, office buildings, mixed-use properties. The money started flowing in, not extravagantly, but comfortably. We upgraded the house, traveled during summer breaks, put Benjamin through private school and eventually college. I retired from teaching at 55, ready to enjoy the fruits of our decades of hard work. Thomas and I had plans: European river cruises, visiting all the national parks, maybe buying a small winter place in Arizona. Then, 5 years ago, Thomas collapsed in his office from a massive heart attack. He was 68 years old. Gone before the ambulance arrived. The grief nearly destroyed me. For months, I wandered through this big house like a ghost, unable to eat, unable to sleep, unable to imagine a future without the man I'd shared my life with for 45 years. Benjamin tried to help, visiting regularly, handling the immediate aftermath of his father's death, the funeral arrangements, the estate paperwork, the endless condolence calls. Eventually, I found a way to keep living. Not the same kind of living as before, but a quieter existence built around routines and small pleasures. My garden. My book club. Lunch every Tuesday at the Riverside Cafe. Volunteer work at the Ashford Heights Public Library. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was mine, and I'd made peace with it. The house, now fully paid off and worth over $1 million in today's market, represented everything Thomas and I had built together. Our investments, carefully managed by Thomas's longtime financial advisor, Marcus Chin, had grown to nearly $2 million. Add in my teacher's pension, Social Security, and Thomas's life insurance policy, and I was comfortable. Not wealthy by billionaire standards, but secure. Independent. Able to live my remaining years with dignity and without being a burden to anyone. That financial independence became increasingly important as Benjamin's life took turns I hadn't anticipated. Benjamin had married his college sweetheart, Lauren Mitchell, when he was 26. They'd seemed perfect together, both ambitious, both warm and funny, both devoted to building a stable family life. They'd given me 2 beautiful grandchildren, Sophie, now 14, and Jackson, 11. For 23 years, their marriage appeared solid. Benjamin had followed his father into the real estate business, though he'd specialized in residential rather than commercial properties. Lauren worked as a pediatric nurse. They lived in a lovely suburban home in Bridgewater, about 30 minutes from Ashford Heights. We celebrated holidays together, took family vacations, maintained the kind of close extended family bonds I'd always hoped for. Then, 2 years ago, everything fractured. Benjamin started working with a new real estate agent at his firm, a woman named Vivian Delacroix. She was 34 years old, nearly 2 decades younger than Benjamin's 51 years. According to Sophie, who'd accidentally discovered text messages on her father's phone, the affair had been going on for at least 6 months before Lauren found out. The divorce was brutal. Lauren was devastated, the children were traumatized, and Benjamin seemed to be experiencing some kind of midlife crisis that made him unrecognizable. He moved out of the family home and into a modern downtown loft. He started dressing younger, designer jeans, expensive watches, tailored shirts that showed off the results of his new gym obsession. And he moved Vivian into his loft within weeks of the divorce being finalized. I'd tried to remain neutral during the separation, hoping Benjamin would come to his senses. But watching Lauren's pain, seeing Sophie's grades drop and Jackson develop anxiety that required therapy, made neutrality impossible. I'd told Benjamin exactly what I thought of his choices. You threw away 23 years of marriage for what? A younger woman who flatters your ego? I'd said during a tense conversation in this very living room. You don't understand, Mom, he'd replied, his voice defensive. Lauren and I had grown apart. We were just going through the motions. Vivian makes me feel alive again. You feel alive because you're acting like an irresponsible teenager instead of a 51-year-old father of 2, I'd shot back. Your children are suffering, Benjamin. Lauren is suffering. Don't you care about that? Of course I care. But I can't stay in a dead marriage just to make everyone else comfortable. I deserve to be happy too. That conversation had ended badly, with Benjamin storming out and not speaking to me for 3 weeks. Eventually, we'd reconciled to a degree, awkward phone calls, occasional visits, but the easy warmth between us had vanished. Vivian herself was a piece of work. When Benjamin finally insisted on introducing us formally, about 18 months ago, I'd agreed to meet them for dinner at Harborview Grill, one of Ashford Heights' upscale waterfront restaurants. Vivian had arrived dressed like she was attending a fashion show, a tight red dress that left little to the imagination, stiletto heels that made her tower over Benjamin, and enough jewelry to stock a small boutique. Her dark hair was styled in elaborate waves, her makeup professionally applied, her perfume so strong I could smell it from across the table. Mrs. Whitmore, she'd said, extending a manicured hand with crimson nails at least 2 inches long. I've heard so much about you. Benjamin talks about you constantly. Her accent was affected, some strange combination of fake French and exaggerated sophistication that made me wonder if Delacroix was even her real name. Please, call me Eleanor, I'd said, shaking her hand briefly. And what should I call you? Vivian or Viv? Vivian, absolutely. I never shorten it. Names have power, don't you think? One should always use the full version. The dinner had been excruciating. Vivian dominated the conversation, talking about luxury brands I'd never heard of, vacation destinations that cost more than most people's annual salary, and her philosophy on life that seemed to boil down to, get what you want, when you want it, regardless of who gets hurt. I believe in living authentically, she'd announced while delicately cutting her $40 C base. Society puts all these restrictions on us, marriage, monogamy, selflessness. But why? Life is short. We should pursue pleasure without guilt. Even when that pleasure causes pain to others? I'd asked quietly. She'd smiled, completely unbothered. Other people's pain isn't my responsibility, Eleanor. We're all adults. We all make choices. Benjamin had looked uncomfortable but said nothing in my defense. As the dinner progressed, Vivian's questions became increasingly focused on my personal circumstances. She'd asked about the house. When had we bought it? What was it worth now? Was it difficult to maintain such a large property at my age? She'd inquired about my daily routine, whether I found it lonely living alone, whether I ever considered downsizing to something more manageable. Benjamin mentioned you have quite a substantial estate, she'd said casually over dessert. It must be a relief knowing you can afford excellent care when you need it. Have you thought about assisted living? I've heard there are some wonderful facilities in the area, very luxurious, like 5-star hotels. I'd set down my coffee cup with deliberate care. I'm 70 years old, Vivian, not 95. I'm in excellent health. I have no plans to leave my home. Oh, of course not now, she'd backtracked smoothly. I just meant eventually. When the time comes. It's smart to plan ahead. The entire conversation felt like an appraisal. Like she was calculating my worth and determining when I might become irrelevant enough to dispose of. After that dinner, Vivian's presence in my life increased whether I wanted it or not. Benjamin started bringing her to family gatherings, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter brunch. She'd sweep in wearing designer outfits, bearing expensive wine that she'd make a show of presenting, and proceed to make subtle digs disguised as concern. Eleanor, you really should consider getting some help with this house. It's so much for one person to manage at your age. Have you thought about updating your will? Estate planning is so important. You wouldn't want the government taking half of everything you've worked for. Benjamin mentioned you still drive yourself everywhere. Isn't that a bit risky? Reflexes slow down as we age. Maybe it's time to consider other transportation options. Every comment was designed to make me feel old, incompetent, and in need of management. And Benjamin, instead of defending me or telling her to back off, would simply smile uncomfortably and change the subject. But the real trouble started about 6 months ago, when Vivian's mask began to slip more noticeably. It began with small requests. Could Benjamin borrow some money to invest in a can't-miss real estate opportunity? Just $20,000, and he'd pay me back with interest within 6 months. Against my better judgment, I'd agreed, wanting to help my son. The money was never repaid. When I mentioned it 3 months later, Benjamin had looked genuinely confused. Oh, that deal fell through, Mom. But don't worry, we'll get you back when the next opportunity comes through. Then there was the incident with my jewelry. I kept my most valuable pieces, the diamond bracelet, emerald ring, and pearl necklace Thomas had given me over the years, in a safe in my bedroom closet. One afternoon, I'd come home from my book club to find Benjamin and Vivian in my house. Benjamin had his own key for emergencies, but this hadn't been an emergency. We were just checking on you, Benjamin had explained when I'd found them upstairs, suspiciously close to my bedroom. You weren't answering your phone. My phone was on silent during book club, I'd said slowly. And you didn't call beforehand to say you were coming. Vivian had appeared in my bedroom doorway at that moment, her eyes sweeping across my personal space with undisguised interest. What a charming room, she'd said. So much potential if you updated the decor. These antiques are lovely but a bit depressing, don't you think? After they'd left, I'd checked the safe. Everything was still there, but the lock had been recently manipulated. There were tiny scratches around the keyhole that hadn't been there before. They'd tried to open it. I'd changed the combination that evening and hidden the new code where only I could find it. The incidents continued. Vivian started dropping by unannounced, always when Benjamin was, coincidentally, in the neighborhood. She'd wander through my house, touching things, opening drawers and cabinets, asking invasive questions about what I planned to do with various possessions. This china set is exquisite, she'd say, running her fingers over my grandmother's wedding dishes. Are you planning to leave this to Sophie? Or would you consider giving it to Benjamin now? It seems a shame to keep it locked away in a cabinet. These antique books must be worth something, she'd observe while examining my late husband's collection of first editions. Have you had them appraised? You could probably sell them for a nice sum. Not that you need the money, of course, but why let them just sit here gathering dust? Every visit felt like she was mentally dividing up my possessions, deciding what she wanted and what was worthless. The breaking point came 3 weeks ago. I'd invited Benjamin over for Sunday lunch, just the two of us. I'd hoped that without Vivian's influence, we might reconnect, talk honestly about how concerned I was about his choices and his relationship with his children. Sophie had been calling me in tears regularly, saying her father barely had time for her anymore, that every conversation somehow circled back to Vivian and her needs. I'd made Benjamin's favorite meal, pot roast with roasted vegetables, homemade rolls, and apple pie for dessert. I'd set the dining room table with care, hoping to create an atmosphere of warmth and family connection. When the doorbell rang at noon, I'd opened it with a smile that immediately froze on my face. Benjamin wasn't alone. Vivian stood beside him, dressed in a severe black pantsuit that made her look like she was attending a business meeting. And behind them was a stranger, a thin man in his 60s wearing an expensive suit and carrying a leather briefcase. "Mom, I hope you don't mind," Benjamin had said, not meeting my eyes. Vivian wanted to join us. "And we brought Gerald Fitzpatrick, he's an estate planning attorney. We thought it would be good to have him here to answer any questions." My stomach had dropped. "Benjamin," I specifically said, "just the two of us." Vivian had pushed past me into the house, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. "Eleanor, don't be difficult. This is important. We're trying to help you." Gerald Fitzpatrick had extended his hand with a practiced smile. "Mrs. Whitmore, it's a pleasure. I've heard so much about you. I promise this won't take long, just a brief discussion about securing your legacy and protecting your family's future." I'd wanted to slam the door in all their faces. But Benjamin was my son. Despite everything, despite Vivian, despite his terrible choices, he was still my child. So I'd stepped aside and let them in, dread pooling in my stomach. They'd settled in my living room, Vivian on the sofa like she owned it, Benjamin beside her looking uncomfortable, Gerald in my favorite armchair with his briefcase open on his lap. "Mrs. Whitmore," Gerald had begun, pulling out documents and spreadsheets, "I've been reviewing your estate at Benjamin's request." "At Benjamin's request?" I'd interrupted sharply. "How do you know anything about my estate?" Benjamin had shifted uncomfortably. "I have access to some of your accounts, remember? You added me years ago when Dad died, in case of emergency." "For emergencies, Benjamin. Not for sharing with strangers." "Gerald's not a stranger, he's a professional," Vivian had interjected, her voice taking on that condescending tone she used when explaining things to me like I was a child. "And Eleanor, let's be realistic. You're 70 years old. You're not getting any younger. Don't you think it's time to make some smart decisions about your assets?" Gerald had continued as if I hadn't objected. "Based on the information Benjamin provided, you have approximately $2.9 million in total assets. The house alone is currently valued at $1.3 million. You have investment accounts totaling about $1.4 million, retirement funds, life insurance, and various other holdings." Hearing my private financial information discussed so casually had made me feel violated and exposed. "Without proper estate planning," Gerald had continued, "taxes could consume 40 to 50% of your wealth. That's over $1 million that would go to the government instead of your family. Surely you don't want that? What exactly are you proposing?" I'd asked, though I already knew the answer would be something terrible. Vivian had leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with barely concealed greed. "A comprehensive restructuring of your estate. First, we'd establish a living trust with Benjamin as the primary trustee and beneficiary. The house would be deeded to him immediately, you'd retain the right to live here until you pass, of course, but legal ownership would transfer now. That alone would save hundreds of thousands in estate taxes." "You want me to give my house to Benjamin," I'd said flatly. "Not give, transfer for tax purposes," Gerald had clarified. "You'd still live here. Nothing would change in your daily life. Except I'd no longer own my own home." "Technically, no," Vivian had admitted. "But Eleanor, think about Benjamin. This is his inheritance. Why make him wait until you're gone and let the government take half? Why not give him the gift now, while you're still here to see him benefit from it?" The audacity of it had taken my breath away. They wanted me to hand over the house Thomas and I had spent 49 years in, the home that held every memory of my married life, just so Benjamin could have it immediately instead of waiting for nature to take its course. "There's more," Gerald had said, pulling out additional documents. "Your investment accounts should be restructured with Benjamin as joint owner with right of survivorship. Again, this avoids probate and estate taxes. We'd also recommend you gift him $200,000 immediately, That's within the annual gift tax exclusion limit if we structure it properly. You want me to give Benjamin $200,000? Right now? It's a smart financial move, Vivian had said, her patience clearly wearing thin. You're just sitting on all this money, Eleanor. What are you doing with it? What do you need it for? You have your pension and Social Security. You're not traveling or spending it. It's just accumulating in accounts while the tax burden grows. Why not let Benjamin benefit from it now, when he can actually use it to improve his life? His life seems pretty comfortable already, I'd observed. Vivian's expression had hardened. Benjamin has expenses you don't understand. He's building a business, maintaining a lifestyle. He has Sophie and Jackson's college funds to worry about. Not all of us can just sit around in a paid-off house doing nothing. The insult had hung in the air between us. Benjamin had finally spoken, his voice carrying a whining quality I'd never heard before. Mom, why are you being so stubborn about this? We're trying to help you. This is smart planning. Don't you want to protect your estate? Protect it from whom? From the government, or from the family that's trying to take it while I'm still alive? That's not fair, Benjamin had protested. I'm your son. I'm your only heir. This money is going to be mine eventually anyway. Why not make the transfer now when it benefits everyone? Benefits everyone? How does giving away my assets benefit me? Vivian had stood abruptly, pacing to the window with barely contained frustration. When she turned back, her mask had slipped completely. Her face was twisted with contempt and calculation. Let's stop playing games, Eleanor. You're 70 years old. You could have a stroke tomorrow. You could develop dementia. You could fall down these ridiculous stairs and break your hip. And then what? You end up in a nursing home, and your estate gets drained paying for care, and Benjamin gets nothing. Is that what you want? To be selfish enough that you'd rather waste everything on your own care than pass it to your son while you still can? The cruelty of it had stunned me into silence. Vivian, Benjamin had started, but she'd cut him off. No, Benjamin, someone needs to say it. Your mother is being completely unreasonable. She's sitting on a fortune she doesn't need while you struggle. She's living alone in a house too big for one person. She's holding on to assets out of pure stubbornness and control. Gerald had tried to intervene with professional smoothness. Perhaps we should all take a moment to. The morning after the confrontation, I woke to 17 missed calls from Benjamin and 12 text messages. I deleted them without reading past the first few words. Mom, please. We need to talk. You're overreacting. I wasn't overreacting. For the first time in years, I was seeing my situation with absolute clarity. I made myself a pot of strong coffee and sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Thomas and I had shared thousands of breakfasts, where we'd helped Benjamin with homework, where we'd planned our dreams and celebrated our victories. The morning sun streamed through the lace curtains I'd hung 30 years ago, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny spirits. My hands were steady as I opened my laptop and began making a list. Years of teaching had trained me to be organized, methodical. If I was going to protect myself, I needed a plan. First item, change all my passwords and security codes. Second item, remove Benjamin's access to my financial accounts. Third item, review my current will and estate plan. Fourth item, find out exactly what legal rights Benjamin actually had regarding my assets. Fifth item, document everything that had happened. I spent the morning working through my list with focused determination. I changed every password I could think of, bank accounts, investment portfolios, email, social media, even my Netflix account. I called my bank and had Benjamin removed as an authorized user on my checking and savings accounts. The customer service representative had been sympathetic when I'd explained, in vague terms, that there had been a family disagreement. I understand completely, Mrs. Whitmore, she'd said kindly. We see this more often than you'd think. Your accounts are now secured with new access codes. Only you can make changes or withdrawals. By noon, I'd accomplished more than I had in weeks. But I'd also worked up an appetite and realized I hadn't eaten anything since yesterday's lunch, the pot roast I'd made for Benjamin that had gone cold and uneaten after they'd left. I decided to treat myself to lunch at the Riverside Cafe, my usual Tuesday spot. It was Monday, but I needed the comfort of familiar surroundings and friendly faces. The Riverside Cafe sat along the banks of the Ashford River, a charming establishment that had been serving the community for over 60 years. It occupied a converted Victorian house with a wraparound porch, flower boxes overflowing with petunias and geraniums, and large windows that offered views of the water. Inside, exposed brick walls were decorated with local artwork, mismatched antique tables and chairs gave it a cozy, eclectic feel, and the smell of fresh-baked bread always greeted you at the door. I'd been eating there at least once a week for the past 20 years. After Thomas died, my Tuesday lunches at Riverside had become a ritual, a way to get out of the house, to see familiar faces, to feel connected to my community. The lunch rush was just beginning when I arrived at 12:30. Sarah, the owner, greeted me with her usual warm smile. She was in her mid-50s, with streaked gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and kind eyes that never missed much. "Eleanor. We weren't expecting you today, it's Monday. Everything all right?" "Just needed a change of scenery," I said, forcing brightness into my voice. "Is my usual table available?" "For you?" "Always." "Let me grab you a menu." "No need. I'll have the chicken salad sandwich and the tomato bisque." Sarah had started to turn away, then paused, studying my face more carefully. "You sure you're okay? You look a bit tired." The unexpected kindness threatened to crack the composed facade I'd been maintaining all morning. "I'm fine, Sarah. Just didn't sleep well." She'd squeezed my shoulder gently before heading to the kitchen, leaving me alone at my corner table with its view of the river. I was gazing out at the water, watching a pair of ducks paddle lazily downstream, when I heard a soft voice beside me. "Excuse me, Mrs. Whitmore? I have your water and some fresh bread from the oven. Sarah thought you might like it." I looked up to find a young man I didn't recognize standing by my table with a tray. He appeared to be in his mid-20s, with sandy brown hair that fell across his forehead, warm hazel eyes, and a shy smile. He wore the cafe standard uniform, black pants, white button-down shirt, and a green apron embroidered with the Riverside Cafe logo. "Thank you," I said, accepting the water glass. "I don't think we've met before. Are you new here?" "Yes, ma'am. I started about 3 weeks ago. My name is Christopher Hayes, but everyone calls me Chris." "Well, welcome to Riverside, Chris. I hope Sarah's treating you well, she's a good employer." His face lit up with genuine warmth. "She's been wonderful. Actually, she talks about you quite a bit. Says you're one of her favorite regulars. She mentioned you were a teacher for many years?" 35 years of high school English, I confirmed. "Retired now, but I still miss it sometimes." "That must have been rewarding work. What did you love most about teaching?" The question surprised me. Most young people, when they discovered I'd been a teacher, would make polite small talk and move on. But Chris seemed genuinely interested, his posture open and attentive. "I loved watching students discover their own voices through writing," I found myself saying. "There's something magical about helping a teenager realize they have something important to say and giving them the tools to say it effectively." Chris smiled. "That sounds like you were the kind of teacher everyone remembers. The one who actually cared." Before I could respond, Sarah's voice called from the kitchen. "Chris. Order up. I should let you enjoy your lunch," he said apologetically. "But I hope we can talk more sometime. I'm trying to learn about the community here. I just moved to Ashford Heights a few months ago." He'd headed back to the kitchen, leaving me with an unexpected feeling of warmth. It had been a long time since someone young had shown genuine interest in talking with me, rather than looking through me or patronizing me. My lunch arrived shortly after. The chicken salad was perfect, the tomato bisque rich and comforting. As I ate, I continued working through my mental list of tasks. I needed to call Marcus Chin, Thomas's financial advisor who still managed my investments. I needed to contact my lawyer, though I wasn't sure the semi-retired attorney who'd handled our basic estate planning years ago was equipped to deal with what might be coming. I was so lost in thought that I didn't notice Chris approaching again until he spoke softly. "Mrs. Whitmore? I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to check if everything was all right with your meal. You seem a bit distracted." I looked up, startled. "Oh, no, everything's delicious. I'm just thinking about some things I need to take care of." He hesitated, then said something that caught me completely off guard. "I hope this isn't too forward, but you seem sad." "Not just thinking, sad. I don't mean to pry, but if you ever need someone to listen, I'm a pretty good listener." The unexpected kindness, offered by a near stranger, nearly broke through the dam I'd built around my emotions. I blinked rapidly, fighting back tears. "That's very kind of you, Chris. I'm just dealing with some family complications." "I understand. Family can be the hardest thing to navigate sometimes." He paused, then added quietly, "My grandmother went through something similar before she passed. Her own children trying to take advantage of her. It was heartbreaking to watch." I looked at him sharply. "How did you know?" "I didn't know anything specific," he said quickly. "I'm sorry if I overstepped. It's just, I recognize that particular kind of sadness. The disappointment that comes from people you love not being who you thought they were." His perception was unnerving and comforting at the same time. "Your grandmother, what happened with her?" Chris pulled out the chair across from me, glancing back to make sure Sarah didn't need him. "She was 83, living alone in the house she'd owned for 50 years. My uncle and aunt started pressuring her to sign over her property, claiming they were worried about her being alone, that she couldn't handle things anymore. But really, they just wanted her house. They wanted to sell it and split the money." "What did she do?" "She changed her will. Left everything to a local animal shelter instead. When she died and they found out, they were furious. Tried to contest it, but she'd been very careful to document everything, all their attempts to manipulate her, all their unkind words. The will stood." "Good for her," I said fiercely. "The thing is," Chris continued, his voice thoughtful, "she told me before she died that the hardest part wasn't giving away her assets to charity instead of family. The hardest part was accepting that her own children had never really seen her as a person. Just as a resource to be managed and eventually harvested." His words struck so close to home that I had to look away, focusing on the river outside the window. That was exactly how I felt, like a resource, not a person. A bank account with an inconvenient consciousness attached. "Your grandmother sounds like she was a remarkable woman," I managed to say. "She was. Stubborn as hell, sharp as a tack until the very end, and she didn't let anyone push her around. She taught me that kindness doesn't mean being a doormat, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is set boundaries, even if it hurts." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Chris stood, checking his watch. "I really should get back to work. But Mrs. Whitmore, if you ever want to talk, just to talk, without any agenda or judgment, I'm here most days for lunch service and sometimes dinner. Consider me a friendly ear." "Thank you, Chris. That means more than you know." After he left, I sat for a long time nursing my coffee and thinking about his grandmother's story. The parallel to my own situation was striking. But what resonated most was the idea of not being seen as a person, just as a resource. That was exactly what Vivian had done yesterday. And Benjamin had allowed it. That afternoon, I called Donald Pemberton, the attorney who'd handled Thomas's estate and our basic legal affairs for the past 20 years. Donald was 72 now, semi-retired, spending most of his time on the golf course or with his grandchildren. But he agreed to see me the next morning. Pemberton and Associates occupied a modest brick building on Ashford Heights Main Street, sandwiched between a bakery and a used bookstore. The office had a distinctly dated feel, wood paneling from the 1970s, worn carpet, legal books lining shelves that probably hadn't been dusted in months. But Donald himself was sharp-minded despite his age. He greeted me with a warm handshake and genuine concern in his eyes. "Eleanor, It's good to see you, though your phone call yesterday suggested this isn't a social visit. What's going on? I settled into the leather chair across from his desk, the same chair I'd sat in 5 years ago when we'd handled Thomas's estate, and laid out the entire situation. The increasing pressure from Vivian and Benjamin. The gifts they'd asked for. The attempted manipulation. And finally, the ambush meeting with Gerald Fitzpatrick. Donald's expression grew darker as I spoke. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment, his fingers steepled under his chin. Eleanor, I'm going to be very direct with you. What they attempted yesterday was elder financial abuse. The threats about having you declared incompetent? That was coercion. If they'd succeeded in getting you to sign those documents under those circumstances, we could potentially have challenged them in court. But they didn't succeed, I pointed out. No, but they'll try again. People like this, and I'm sorry to say this about your son, people who are willing to go this far once will escalate. They'll become more aggressive, more creative in their attempts. A chill ran down my spine. What can I do to protect myself? Donald pulled out a legal pad and began making notes. Several things. First, we need to review your current will and estate plan. When was the last time you updated it? Right after Thomas died. 5 years ago. And what does it currently say? Everything goes to Benjamin. The house, the investments, my personal possessions, it all passes to him upon my death. Donald nodded grimly. That's what I was afraid of. Eleanor, as long as Benjamin is your sole heir and knows it, the pressure will continue. He and Vivian will see your assets as money that already belongs to them, they're just waiting for you to get out of the way. The bluntness stung, but I appreciated his honesty. So what do you suggest? Change your will. Create some uncertainty about what Benjamin will actually inherit. Add conditions, alternative beneficiaries, or charitable donations. Make it clear that you're still in control and that his inheritance isn't guaranteed. Won't that make things worse? Won't it make him more desperate? Possibly. But it will also make him more careful. Right now, he thinks he just has to wait you out or pressure you enough to get what he wants. If he knows that behavior could actually cost him his inheritance, he might back off. I considered this. What kind of conditions or alternatives are you thinking? Donald leaned back in his chair, warming to the subject. There are many options. You could specify that Benjamin only inherits if he meets certain conditions, maintaining a relationship with his children, treating you with respect, that sort of thing. You could leave portions to your grandchildren in trust. You could designate significant charitable donations. You could even name alternative beneficiaries if Benjamin predeceases you or if he challenges the will. I have a question, I said slowly. If I wanted to change my will to leave everything to someone else entirely, not Benjamin, could I do that? Donald's eyebrows rose. Legally? Yes, absolutely. You have complete freedom to dispose of your assets however you choose. Morally and practically, that's a more complex question. Is that something you're seriously considering? I don't know yet. I'm just trying to understand my options. Well, you should know that if you disinherit your only child completely, he could contest the will. Oregon law doesn't require you to leave anything to your adult children, but they can challenge a will on grounds of undue influence, lack of capacity, or improper execution. Given that Vivian has already raised questions about your mental competence, that's something to consider. The thought made me angry all over again. So even though I'm perfectly competent, her accusations could cause problems later? They could. Which is why, if you do make significant changes to your will, we need to document your capacity very carefully. I'd recommend having you evaluated by a physician who can attest to your mental acuity. We'd also want to document the reasons for any changes, create a record of Benjamin's behavior, Vivian's threats, everything that's happened. How long would all this take? The evaluation could be done within a week if we find the right doctor. Drafting a new will, depending on complexity, could take anywhere from a few days to a few weeks. But Eleanor, I need to know, are you seriously considering disinheriting Benjamin, or are you just upset right now? Because this is a decision that will have lasting consequences for your family. I stared at my hands, folded in my lap. Hands that had graded thousands of papers, cooked thousands of meals, held my baby son, nursed my dying husband. Hands that had built a life through decades of work and love and sacrifice. Donald, yesterday my son stood in my living room and let his mistress call me senile. He shared my private financial information without my permission. He brought a lawyer to my home to pressure me into signing over my assets. He didn't defend me. He didn't choose me. He chose money and a woman he's known less than 2 years over the mother who raised him. My voice broke slightly, but I pushed through. So yes, I'm upset. But I'm also clear-headed enough to know that the son I raised is gone. The man standing in his place is someone I don't recognize. Someone who sees me as an obstacle, not a person. So to answer your question, I don't know yet what I'm going to do with my will. But I want all my options available. Donald nodded slowly. Then let's make sure you have them. I'll start working on several different will scenarios, one that modifies Benjamin's inheritance with conditions, one that splits it between Benjamin and others, and one that leaves him a minimal amount while directing the bulk of your estate elsewhere. You can review all of them and decide which feels right. Thank you, Donald. There's one more thing we should discuss, he said, his tone serious. Power of attorney and healthcare directives. Do you currently have those in place? Yes. Benjamin is my power of attorney for both financial and healthcare decisions. Donald's expression became grave. Eleanor, you need to revoke those immediately. Today. Right now. If anything happens to you, if you have a stroke, an accident, any medical emergency, Benjamin would have complete control over your finances and your medical care. Given what you've told me about his behavior, that's an unacceptable risk. The implications hit me like a physical blow. If I fell down my stairs and hit my head, Benjamin could make decisions about my medical care. He could decide whether I received aggressive treatment or not. He could access all my accounts while I was incapacitated. With Vivian whispering in his ear the whole time. Oh God, I whispered. I know it's frightening to think about. But we need to act quickly. I'm going to draft revocation documents right now. We'll have you sign them today, and we'll send copies to your bank, your financial advisor, and anyone else who needs to know. Then we'll establish new powers of attorney designating someone else, someone you trust completely. Who? I asked helplessly. My grandchildren are too young. I don't have siblings. Most of my close friends are around my age with their own health issues. Who can I trust with that kind of responsibility? Think about it carefully. Is there anyone in your life, a friend, a colleague, even a professional like your financial advisor, who you trust to act in your best interests? Marcus Chin came to mind immediately. He'd been managing my investments for 15 years, had been Thomas's friend as well as his advisor, and had always treated me with respect and transparency. But was it fair to burden him with that kind of responsibility? My financial advisor, Marcus Chin. He's trustworthy. But I'd need to talk to him first. Good. Talk to him today. In the meantime, I'm going to draft emergency revocation documents. Can you stay here for about an hour while I prepare them? Yes, of course. Donald stood, gathering his legal pad. Eleanor, I know this is overwhelming. But you're doing the right thing by protecting yourself. And for what it's worth, I'm sorry. Sorry that Benjamin has put you in this position. Sorry that you're having to treat your own son like a potential threat. After he left the office, I sat alone, staring out the window at Ashford Heights Main Street. People walked by going about their normal lives, buying bread at the bakery, browsing books, stopping to chat with neighbors. Normal life, undisturbed by betrayal and legal maneuvering. How had my life come to this? How had mother-son Sunday dinners turned into estate planning emergencies? My phone buzzed in my purse. Another text from Benjamin, Mom, please talk to me. I know Vivian went too far yesterday. Let me explain. I love you. I stared at the words. He loved me. Maybe he even believed that. But his love came with conditions and calculations. It wasn't enough to override his greed or his infatuation with Vivian. It wasn't enough to make him defend me when I needed him most. I didn't respond to the text. Instead, I called Marcus Chen. Marcus Chen's office was in a modern building near the waterfront, all glass and steel and contemporary design. His practice, Chen Financial Management, occupied the entire third floor. Unlike Donald's dated law office, Marcus's space was sleek and professional, minimalist furniture, abstract art on the walls, floor-to-ceiling windows with views of the river. Marcus himself was 58 years old, with salt and pepper hair and warm brown eyes behind stylish glasses. He'd been Thomas's friend first, meeting him through a business networking group in the early 2000s. When Thomas's previous financial advisor retired, Marcus had taken over management of our investments. After Thomas died, he'd helped me navigate the complex financial aftermath with patience and compassion. He greeted me in his office with evident concern. "Eleanor, I got your message that you needed to see me urgently. What's going on?" I settled into one of his comfortable client chairs and, for the second time that day, laid out the entire situation. Marcus listened without interrupting, his expression growing increasingly troubled. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, processing. Then he stood and walked to his window, hands clasped behind his back. "Benjamin called me last week," he said quietly. "He wanted to discuss your investment portfolio. Said you'd asked him to review your holdings and wanted my input on restructuring some assets." My blood ran cold. I never asked him to do any such thing. "I know. That's why I told him I couldn't discuss your accounts without your explicit written permission. He got quite insistent, said as your son and power of attorney, he had the right to information about your finances. I told him that power of attorney doesn't give him access to your accounts unless you're incapacitated, and that I needed to hear directly from you before having any conversations about your portfolio." What did he say to that? He became angry. Accused me of being difficult and unhelpful. Then he said something that raised red flags for me. Marcus turned from the window to face me directly. He said, and I quote, "My mother isn't as sharp as she used to be. She needs family help managing her affairs, whether she admits it or not. I'm just trying to protect her from her own poor decisions." The words hung in the air between us like a poison cloud. "He's building a narrative," I said slowly, understanding dawning. "He's telling people I'm incompetent. Creating a record of supposed concern so that later, if he needs to petition for conservatorship, he'll have evidence that he tried to help and I refused." "That's exactly what it sounded like to me," Marcus confirmed. "Which is why I documented the conversation in detail and sent you an email about it. Did you receive it?" I pulled out my phone and checked. Sure enough, there was an email from Marcus dated 4 days ago with the subject line, "Regarding Benjamin's inquiry, please review." I'd been so busy with other things that I hadn't opened it. "I see it now. I'm sorry I didn't respond, I've been somewhat distracted lately." "Understandable. But Eleanor, we need to talk about protecting your assets. If Benjamin is planning to challenge your competency, we need to be proactive. Donald Pemberton is already working on revoking Benjamin's power of attorney. He suggested I ask you if you'd be willing to serve as my financial power of attorney instead." Marcus considered this carefully. "I'd be honored, Eleanor. But I want to make sure you understand what that means. It would give me legal authority to manage your finances if you became incapacitated. That's a significant responsibility and a profound trust. Are you sure you want to place that kind of power in the hands of someone who, while friendly, is not family?" "Right now, Marcus, the fact that you're not family is exactly why I trust you. You don't stand to inherit anything from me. You have no financial incentive to see me declared incompetent or to mismanage my assets. And you've spent 15 years proving your integrity and competence." He nodded slowly. "Then yes, I'll do it. But let's also talk about other protective measures. Have you considered creating a trust? Donald mentioned that as a possibility for the will, but I don't really understand how trusts work." Marcus returned to his desk and pulled out a legal pad, beginning to sketch out diagrams as he explained. A revocable living trust would transfer ownership of your assets, your house, your investments, your accounts, into the trust. You'd serve as the trustee, maintaining complete control during your lifetime. But you'd also name a successor trustee who would manage the assets if you became incapacitated or when you pass away. How is that different from a will? Several ways. First, a trust avoids probate. The assets pass directly to beneficiaries without going through court. Second, it's much harder to challenge than a will. Third, and most importantly for your situation, if you become incapacitated, your successor trustee takes over immediately, without needing court involvement. Benjamin wouldn't be able to petition for conservatorship because the assets would already be managed by someone you designated. So it would protect me from what Vivian threatened, them trying to take control if something happens to me. Exactly. And as an added benefit, trusts are private. Unlike wills, which become public record when you die, trusts don't go through probate. Benjamin wouldn't even know what was in the trust until after you passed. The idea of having that privacy, of not having my final wishes become public fodder for family drama, was appealing. What would something like that cost? Setting up a comprehensive trust typically runs between $3,000 and $5,000 in legal fees. But given your asset level, it's absolutely worth the investment. I can recommend several attorneys who specialize in estate planning and elder law, people with more expertise in this area than Donald, no offense to him. None taken. He said essentially the same thing, that this situation requires specialized knowledge. Marcus made a note on his pad. There's one more thing we should discuss. Your current investment allocation. What about it? Right now, you have approximately $1.4 million in various investment accounts, mutual funds, stocks, bonds, that sort of thing. It's a well-diversified portfolio that generates income while preserving capital. But all of those accounts list Benjamin as a beneficiary on death. I hadn't thought about that. When we'd set up those accounts, it had seemed natural to name Benjamin as the beneficiary. He was my only child, my heir. Of course the accounts would go to him. But that was before. Before Vivian. Before the betrayal. Before everything changed. Can I change the beneficiaries? I asked. Absolutely. You can change them to anyone you want, your grandchildren, charities, or even remove them entirely so the accounts pass through your estate. But Eleanor, before you make any changes, I need to ask, are you making these decisions from a place of clarity, or from a place of anger and hurt? The question wasn't accusatory, his tone was gentle, genuinely concerned. But it still stung a little. Does it matter? The facts are the same regardless of my emotional state. Benjamin tried to coerce me into giving away my assets. He didn't defend me when his mistress called me senile. He's been building a narrative that I'm incompetent so he can take control. Those facts don't change whether I'm angry or calm. You're right, Marcus acknowledged. I just want to make sure you're not making irreversible decisions in the heat of the moment that you might regret later. I appreciate that. Truly. But Marcus, I've been thinking about this constantly since yesterday. And what I keep coming back to is this: if I died tomorrow, Benjamin would inherit everything. Millions of dollars. And Vivian would be right there, helping him spend it. The woman who called me senile would be living in my house, sleeping in my bedroom, wearing my jewelry. That thought is unbearable. Yes. Vivian and I want to start a family. But we can't do that in a 2-bedroom loft. We need space. We need financial stability. And you're sitting on millions while we struggle. You struggle? You drive a Mercedes. You live in a luxury loft. Your real estate business is successful. How exactly are you struggling? Do you know how expensive it is to maintain the lifestyle necessary to attract high-end real estate clients? The clothes, the car, the address, it all costs money. And now with the divorce settlement Lauren demanded, plus Sophie and Jackson's expenses, I'm stretched thin. I need help, Mom. Your help. Is that so wrong? I stared at my son, this man I'd raised to be kind and responsible and honest, and barely recognized him. He was actually saying these things out loud without a trace of shame. He actually believed he deserved my money because maintaining his image for clients was expensive. Let me be very clear, Benjamin. I'm not giving you money. I'm not deeding you my house. I'm not restructuring my estate to benefit you immediately instead of when I actually die. These are non-negotiable positions. His face hardened. Fine. Then you're making this harder than it needs to be. Is that a threat? It's a reality. If you won't do this the easy way, if you insist on being difficult, then Vivian and I will have no choice but to take other steps. For your own protection, of course. Other steps meaning what? Having me declared incompetent? Petitioning for conservatorship? Good luck with that, Benjamin. I've already been evaluated by my physician, who says I'm in excellent mental and physical health. I've already revoked your power of attorney, you no longer have any legal authority over my affairs. And I'm in the process of restructuring my entire estate with attorneys who specialize in protecting people from exactly this kind of elder abuse. Benjamin's face went pale. You revoked my power of attorney? This morning. Along with your access to my bank accounts and any other financial information. You're no longer listed as a beneficiary on any of my investment accounts either. That's being changed as we speak. You can't do that. I absolutely can. They're my accounts, Benjamin. My assets. My decisions. He stood there, opening and closing his mouth like a fish, seemingly unable to process what I was telling him. Finally, he found his voice, and it was filled with venom I'd never heard from him before. You're going to regret this, Mom. You think you're being clever, but you're just being a bitter old woman who's going to die alone because she pushed away the only family she had left. When you're lying in a nursing home with no one visiting, don't come crying to me. Get out of my house, Benjamin. Now. Gladly. But when you change your mind, and you will, because you'll realize how pathetic your life is without us in it, don't expect me to come running back. I'm done trying to help someone who doesn't want to be helped. He stormed toward the door, then turned back with one final barb. Oh, and by the way, Sophie and Jackson asked if they could come visit you next weekend. I told them no. I don't want them exposed to your paranoid conspiracy theories about their father. So you can forget about seeing your grandchildren until you apologize and make this right. The door slammed behind him with such force that one of my picture frames fell off the wall, glass shattering across the hardwood floor. I stood frozen in the sudden silence, my hands shaking, my heart pounding. He'd weaponized my grandchildren. Taken away the two people in his life I loved unconditionally, who loved me back the same way. That was when I knew. Benjamin wasn't going to back down. He wasn't going to see reason. He wasn't going to suddenly remember that I was his mother and treat me with basic decency. This was war now. And I needed to be prepared for however ugly it was going to get. That evening, after I'd swept up the broken glass and tried to calm my shaking hands with chamomile tea, my phone rang. Sophie's name appeared on the screen. I answered immediately. Sophie, sweetheart. Grandma? Her voice was thick with tears. Dad said we can't see you anymore. He said you're sick and saying crazy things about him. That's not true, is it? You're not sick. My heart broke all over again. No, baby, I'm not sick. I'm perfectly fine. Your dad and I are just having a disagreement, that's all. About Vivian? Sophie's voice carried a weight of understanding beyond her 14 years. I heard him talking to her on the phone. She said you were trying to keep them from getting their fair share. What does that mean? I closed my eyes, trying to figure out how to explain this to a teenager without poisoning her relationship with her father. It means we have different ideas about money and fairness. But Sophie, this is between your dad and me. It has nothing to do with how much I love you and Jackson. Can I still come visit you? Dad said no, but Mom said we're old enough to decide for ourselves who we want to see. Lauren. My former daughter-in-law, still protecting my relationship with the grandchildren even after everything Benjamin had put her through. I made a mental note to call her and thank her. Of course you can visit. But sweetie, I don't want to make things harder between you and your dad. If he's saying you can't come, I don't care what he says anymore. Sophie's voice cracked with emotion. He left us for that horrible woman. He barely calls. He missed my last 3 volleyball games because he was too busy. And now he's trying to take you away from us too. It's not fair. I could hear Jackson's voice in the background, younger and just as upset. Is that Grandma? I want to talk to Grandma. There was a rustling sound as Sophie handed over the phone. Grandma? Jackson's voice was small and scared. Are you really sick? Dad said you might have to go to a special hospital. The manipulation was breathtaking. Benjamin was already laying groundwork with his own children, preparing them for the possibility that their grandmother might be institutionalized. Making it seem like it was for my own good. Jackson, I promise you I'm not sick. I'm healthy and strong. Your dad and I are having a grown-up disagreement, but I am absolutely fine. Then why can't we visit? You can visit. I want you to visit. How about next Saturday? I'll make your favorite, lasagna and chocolate chip cookies. Really? The hope in his voice made my throat tight. Really? Tell your mom to call me and we'll arrange it. Okay? Okay. I love you, Grandma. I love you too, sweetheart. Both of you. So very much. After we hung up, I immediately called Lauren. She answered on the second ring. Eleanor, I'm so sorry. I just heard about what happened with Benjamin and that woman. Sophie told me some of it. Thank you for letting them call me. I know it puts you in a difficult position. Lauren's laugh was bitter. Benjamin lost the right to put me in positions when he cheated on me with his secretary. The kids love you. They need you. And I'll be damned if I let him use them as weapons in whatever financial fight he's picked with you. He told them I'm sick. That I might need to go to a special hospital. There was a long pause. That son of a bitch. Eleanor, I'm documenting all of this. The alienation, the manipulation. If he tries to keep the kids from you, I'll take him back to family court so fast his head will spin. I don't want to make your co-parenting relationship worse. It can't get worse. He's already fighting me on everything, support payments, custody schedule, who claims them on taxes. He's suddenly claiming he can't afford his child support obligations because of business expenses. Meanwhile, Vivian posted Instagram pictures last week of them at some exclusive spa resort in Napa. I'm keeping screenshots of everything. Lauren, I need to ask you something. Has Benjamin said anything to you about me having memory problems or mental capacity issues? Another pause, longer this time. He mentioned a few weeks ago that he was worried about you living alone. Said you seemed forgetful and disoriented when he visited. I didn't think much of it at the time, thought he was just being concerned. But now, knowing what I know about the financial pressure he's putting on you. Eleanor, is he building a case to have you declared incompetent? That's exactly what I think he's doing. With Vivian's encouragement. God. I knew she was bad, but this? Lauren took a shaky breath. What can I do to help? Just what you're already doing. Let me see the kids. Document Benjamin's behavior. And maybe, if it comes to it, be willing to testify about his character and his relationship with Vivian. Done. Absolutely. Eleanor, for what it's worth, I still consider you family. You were a wonderful mother-in-law, and you're an even better grandmother. Don't let Benjamin or that gold digger make you feel otherwise. After I hung up with Lauren, I sat for a long time in the growing darkness, not bothering to turn on lights. The house felt bigger and emptier than usual, filled with shadows and silence. Benjamin had threatened me with loneliness. With isolation. With the idea that without his presence in my life, I'd have nothing and no one. But sitting there in my quiet house, I realized he was wrong. I had Sophie and Jackson, who loved me unconditionally. I had Lauren, who still considered me family despite the divorce. I had Marcus and Donald, professionals who'd become trusted allies. I had Sarah at the Riverside Cafe, and her new employee Chris, who'd shown me unexpected kindness. I had myself. My strength. My clarity of purpose. My refusal to be manipulated or controlled. Benjamin could threaten all he wanted. He could try to isolate me, to paint me as mentally unfit, to pressure me into surrendering what was mine. But I wasn't the helpless elderly woman he and Vivian seemed to think I was. I was Eleanor Catherine Whitmore. I'd survived my husband's sudden death. I'd built a life from grief and loneliness. I'd been teaching teenagers for 35 years. If I could manage a classroom full of hormonal adolescents, I could certainly handle one greedy son and his manipulative mistress. The question was, what was I going to do with my estate? What was I going to do about the will that currently left everything to someone who'd proven he didn't deserve it? As I sat there in the darkness, an idea began to form. Not fully developed yet, but taking shape like a photograph emerging in developer fluid. Benjamin thought my money already belonged to him. He thought he just had to wait for me to die or pressure me enough to give it up early. What if I showed him, showed everyone, that he was wrong? That my assets were mine to dispose of however I chose? That kindness and respect mattered more than blood relation? The idea was radical. Possibly vindictive. Definitely dramatic. But the more I thought about it, the more right it felt. I wouldn't decide anything tonight. I'd sleep on it. Talk to Donald. Think it through carefully. But for the first time since that awful Sunday confrontation, I felt a spark of something other than hurt and anger. I felt powerful. The next day was Tuesday, my usual lunch day at Riverside Cafe. I almost didn't go. Part of me wanted to hide in my house, avoid people, nurse my wounds in private. But that was exactly what Benjamin and Vivian would expect. They'd expect me to be devastated, isolated, vulnerable. So I put on my favorite lavender blouse, touched up my makeup, and drove to the cafe with my head held high. Sarah greeted me with her usual warmth, but I could see concern in her eyes. Small-town gossip traveled fast. She'd probably heard something about my family troubles already. "Your usual table's ready," she said, leading me to my corner spot by the window. "And Eleanor? Whatever you're going through, you've got friends here. Remember that." The unexpected kindness made my eyes sting with tears. "Thank you, Sarah. That means more than you know." Chris appeared almost immediately with my water and the fresh bread basket. "Mrs. Whitmore. It's good to see you again." "Hello, Chris. And please, call me Eleanor. I think we're past formalities." He smiled, setting down the bread. "Only if you promise to try the new soup today. Sarah made a roasted red pepper and tomato that's incredible. Consider it done." He started to walk away, then hesitated and turned back. "I hope this isn't overstepping, but you seem lighter today than you did yesterday. Like you've made some kind of decision." His perceptiveness was remarkable. Maybe I have. Or maybe I'm just determined not to let difficult people steal my joy. "Good for you." He pulled out the chair across from me. "Do you mind if I sit for just a minute? It's slow right now, and I've been thinking about something you might want to hear." "Please." He settled into the chair, his expression thoughtful. "I was telling you yesterday about my grandmother and how she changed her will to leave everything to an animal shelter instead of her greedy children." "I remember. What I didn't tell you was the aftermath. When she died and they found out, my uncle and aunt were furious. They contested the will, claimed she'd been manipulated or wasn't in her right mind. But she'd been so careful in documenting everything, all their demands for money, all their unkind treatment, all the times they'd tried to pressure her. The judge read through her journal, looked at the evidence, and upheld the will completely." "Good. But here's the interesting part. The animal shelter she left everything to? They used her donation to build a new facility. Named it after her. Created a plaque telling her story, how she devoted her life to teaching and helping others, and how even in death she chose to help animals who couldn't help themselves rather than rewarding family members who treated her poorly. That must have been quite a statement. It was. And you know what happened? My uncle and aunt became pariahs in their community. Everyone knew what they'd done, how they'd treated her. They'd been so focused on getting her money that they never stopped to think about how their behavior would look to others once it all came out. I studied this young man who seemed to understand far more than his years would suggest. Are you telling me this as encouragement to do something similar? I'm telling you this because I think you're wrestling with a big decision. And sometimes it helps to know that other people have faced similar choices and found peace with them. My grandmother? In her last years, after she changed her will, she was happier than I'd ever seen her. Free. Like she'd finally taken control of her own story instead of letting other people write it for her. Your grandmother sounds like she was a remarkable woman. She was. Kind of like you, actually. Smart, strong, not willing to be pushed around. The world needs more people like that. Before I could respond, Sarah called from the kitchen that an order was up. Chris stood, smiling apologetically. I should get back to work. But Eleanor? Whatever you decide to do, make sure it's what feels right to you. Not what other people expect or demand. Your life, your story, your choice. As he walked away, I sat with his words settling around me like a warm blanket. Your life, your story, your choice. That's what this came down to, wasn't it? Whose story was I living? Was I still following the script that said I owed everything to my only child, regardless of how he treated me? Or was I writing a new story, one where respect and kindness mattered more than biological obligation? My phone buzzed. A text from Benjamin: Mom, we need to talk. Vivian wants to apologize in person. Can we come over tonight? I stared at the message for a long moment. A week ago, I might have said yes. Might have been so desperate to repair the relationship that I'd have welcomed another chance at reconciliation. But now? After everything I'd learned and everything I'd put in place to protect myself? I typed back, no. I'm not ready for that conversation. Please respect my boundaries. His response came almost immediately: You're being unreasonable. We're your family. You can't shut us out forever. I turned off my phone without responding and tucked it into my purse. Chris returned with my soup and sandwich, setting them down with a knowing smile. Good soup helps put the world in perspective, I've found. He was right. The soup was excellent, rich and comforting and warming me from the inside out. As I ate, I watched the river flow past outside the window. Steady, constant, following its own course regardless of obstacles in its path. Water always found a way forward. Maybe I could too. 3 days after my confrontation with Benjamin, I sat in the office of Patricia Brennan, the estate planning attorney Marcus had recommended. Her office was in a converted brownstone near downtown Ashford Heights, and unlike the dated spaces of Donald Pemberton, everything here spoke of modern expertise and professionalism. Patricia herself was in her early 50s, with short silver hair, sharp blue eyes, and the kind of direct manner that immediately put me at ease. She'd spent the first 30 minutes of our meeting reviewing all the documentation I'd brought: copies of my current will, my asset lists, the threatening texts from Benjamin, Marcus's notes about Benjamin's attempts to access my accounts, and a detailed timeline I'd written of every incident over the past 18 months. When she finally looked up from the papers, her expression was grave. Mrs. Whitmore. Eleanor, please. Eleanor. I'm going to be very direct with you. What you've documented here is textbook financial elder abuse. The escalating pressure, the attempts to isolate you from your assets, the threats of conservatorship, the questioning of your mental capacity, these are all recognized tactics. Can Benjamin actually succeed in having me declared incompetent? Not easily, especially now that you've been proactive. The evaluations from your physician, the revocation of his power of attorney, the fact that you're here consulting with me, all of this demonstrates clear mental capacity and the ability to manage your own affairs. But Eleanor, I need to ask you something important. What do you want the outcome of all this to be? I'd been thinking about that question constantly for days. I want to be safe. I want control over my own life and assets. And I want Benjamin to understand that his behavior has consequences. Patricia nodded slowly. Those are all reasonable goals. Now, let me ask you something harder. Do you want Benjamin to inherit anything when you pass away? The question hung in the air between us. This was the decision I'd been circling around, afraid to fully confront. A week ago, I would have said yes without hesitation. He's my only child. But now? I took a shaky breath. Now I look at who he's become, someone who sees me as an obstacle rather than a person. Someone who'd threaten his own mother to get money. Someone who'd use my grandchildren as weapons. Is that the kind of person who deserves to inherit everything I've worked for? That's a question only you can answer. But Eleanor, I want you to understand something. You have complete legal freedom to leave your assets to anyone you choose, family, friends, charities, even strangers. The only requirement is that you be of sound mind when you make that decision, and clearly document your reasoning. What would you recommend? Patricia leaned back in her chair, considering. If you want to make a statement, if you want Benjamin to truly understand the consequences of his actions, then you need to do something he won't expect. Something that demonstrates you're not a helpless elderly woman he can manipulate, but someone fully in control of her own decisions. I've been thinking about something radical, I said slowly. Something that would prove I value kindness and genuine care over blood relation. Tell me. So I told her about Chris. About his unexpected compassion, his story of his grandmother, the way he'd listened without judgment or agenda. About how a near stranger had shown me more respect in 2 brief conversations than my own son had in 2 years. What if I left a significant portion of my estate to him? I said, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. Not everything. I'd want to make sure Sophie and Jackson are provided for through trusts they'd access at 25. But what if the bulk of it went to someone who'd shown me genuine kindness with no expectation of reward? Patricia was quiet for a long moment. That would certainly send a message. But Eleanor, you need to think carefully about this. Are you making this decision from a place of clarity, or from anger and hurt? It was the same question Marcus had asked. And I gave the same answer. Does it matter? The facts are the same. Benjamin has shown me through his actions that he values my money more than our relationship. Why should I reward that behavior with millions of dollars? You shouldn't. But I want to make sure you're prepared for the aftermath. If you make such a dramatic change to your will, Benjamin will contest it. He'll claim undue influence, that Chris manipulated you. He'll claim lack of capacity, that you weren't in your right mind. It will get ugly, Eleanor. Very ugly. Let it get ugly. I'll have documentation of everything. Medical evaluations proving my competence. Witnesses to Benjamin's behavior. His own threatening texts and messages. Let him try to prove I wasn't capable of making my own decisions. Patricia smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. You know what? I think you're going to be just fine. So let's talk about how to structure this in a way that will be ironclad when challenged. We spent the next 2 hours going through options. Patricia recommended a comprehensive revocable living trust that would avoid probate and be much harder to contest than a simple will. We'd transfer all my assets into the trust, the house, investments, bank accounts, everything. I'd serve as trustee during my lifetime, maintaining complete control. But upon my death, the assets would be distributed according to the trust's terms. For Sophie and Jackson, we'll create educational trusts that they can access at 25, Patricia explained. That protects them from parental interference and ensures they benefit regardless of what happens with Benjamin. I'd recommend putting aside about $300,000 for each of them, enough for college, graduate school, and a solid start in life. That's perfect. They're innocent in all this. Now, for the remainder, which would be roughly $2 million plus the house, you have several options. You could split it among multiple beneficiaries. You could leave it all to charities. Or you could, as you suggested, Leave it to someone like Chris who's shown you genuine kindness. What would be the strongest legally? If you're going to leave a substantial estate to a non-family member, we need to document your reasoning extensively. I'd recommend you keep a journal over the next several months, recording your interactions with both Benjamin and Chris. Document every instance of Benjamin's manipulation and every instance of Chris's kindness. We'll also have you evaluated by a geriatric psychiatrist who can testify to your mental capacity. And we'll include a no contest clause in the trust. If Benjamin challenges it and loses, he forfeits even the minimal amount we might leave him. How minimal are we talking? $10,000. Enough that he can't claim he was accidentally forgotten, but small enough to make a statement. And Eleanor, we should include an explanation letter that will be read at the trust reading. Your chance to tell Benjamin exactly why you made these choices. The idea of that letter, of finally being able to say everything I'd been holding back, was both terrifying and exhilarating. How long will all this take to set up? The trust documents will take about 2 weeks to draft. But Eleanor, I don't recommend rushing this. Live with the decision for a few months. Continue documenting. Make sure this is truly what you want, not just an emotional reaction to a painful situation. If you still feel the same way in 3 months, we'll finalize everything. 3 months later. Patricia's advice turned out to be wise. Over the following 3 months, I kept a detailed journal of everything that happened. And what happened confirmed, over and over, that I was making the right decision. Benjamin tried multiple tactics to regain control. First came the apologies, texts and voicemails claiming Vivian had pressured him, that he'd made mistakes, that he wanted to rebuild our relationship. When I didn't respond, the messages turned angry. Then threatening. Then manipulative, claiming Sophie and Jackson were suffering without me in their lives. But Lauren kept her word. Every other Saturday, she drove the kids to my house for the afternoon. We'd bake cookies, work on homework, talk about their lives. They told me about their father's increasingly erratic behavior, missing support payments, canceling visitation, always prioritizing Vivian's wants over their needs. "He's not the dad I remember," Sophie said one afternoon, her voice heavy with sadness. "It's like Vivian changed him into someone else." Meanwhile, my Tuesday lunches at Riverside Cafe became the bright spot of each week. Chris and I developed an unexpected friendship. I learned he was 26, had moved to Ashford Heights after dropping out of a graduate program in social work when his grandmother died and left him feeling adrift. He was working at the cafe while figuring out his next steps. "I thought I wanted to be a therapist," he told me one Tuesday over coffee. "But watching my grandmother go through what she did with my family, I realized I'm not sure I have the emotional distance for that kind of work. I take things too personally." "That's not a weakness, Chris. That's empathy. The world needs more of it." "Maybe. But it doesn't pay the bills." He smiled ruefully. "My grandmother left me a small inheritance, about $15,000. It's keeping me afloat while I figure things out, but it won't last forever." I documented all these conversations in my journal. Not because I was calculating or planning, but because Patricia had told me to record genuine moments that demonstrated Chris's character. And what I recorded was consistently the same: kindness, empathy, genuine interest in my life without any ulterior motive. He never asked about my assets. Never probed about my family situation beyond being a sympathetic listener. Never suggested I owed him anything or should help him financially. He was simply kind. Consistently, genuinely kind. Meanwhile, Benjamin's behavior continued to deteriorate. He married Vivian in a courthouse ceremony without inviting me or even telling me until afterward. He sent me a text, "Thought you should know, Vivian and I got married today. Would have invited you but didn't want the drama." 2 weeks later, they showed up at my house unannounced. I watched from my upstairs window as they tried the door, then walked around the property, peering in windows. I'd had the locks changed, so Benjamin's old key no longer worked. They left after 20 minutes, Vivian's angry voice carrying across the yard, "I told you we should have acted faster. Now she's probably changing everything." She was right. I was. Marcus had successfully transferred all my assets into the new trust Patricia created. My house was now owned by the Eleanor C. Whitmore Living Trust. My investment accounts had been retitled. My beneficiary designations had all been changed to the trust. And I'd finally made my decision about what that trust would say. On a Tuesday afternoon 3 months to the day after my confrontation with Benjamin, I sat in Patricia's office reviewing the final trust documents. Chris's full name, Christopher James Hayes, appeared throughout the paperwork as the primary beneficiary of the residual estate. "Are you sure?" Patricia asked me one final time. "Once you sign these documents, the trust is established. You can modify it later if you change your mind, but Eleanor, this is a major decision." "I'm sure," I said, my hands steady as I reached for the pen. "I've spent 3 months thinking about this, documenting, considering alternatives. And every time I come back to the same question: who deserves to benefit from what I've built? Someone who's treated me with cruelty and manipulation? Or someone who's shown me genuine kindness? The law will recognize your right to make this choice. But Benjamin will fight it. Let him fight. I've been evaluated by Dr. Harrison, who confirmed I'm of completely sound mind. I have 3 months of journal entries. I have witnesses to Benjamin's behavior. I have his own threatening messages. What grounds could he possibly contest on?" Patricia smiled. "You've become quite the legal strategist, Eleanor. I've had good teachers. And strong motivation." I signed the documents, my signature firm and clear. Patricia witnessed them, along with her paralegal. It was done. "Now," Patricia said, pulling out another document. "The letter. Are you ready to write it?" This was the part I'd been both dreading and anticipating. The letter that would be read after my death, explaining my decisions to Benjamin and anyone else who questioned them. I took the blank paper Patricia handed me and began to write. To Benjamin, and to anyone who questions the decisions I've made regarding my estate. I write this letter in sound mind and body, having been evaluated by medical professionals who confirm my complete mental capacity. I write it not in anger, though anger would be justified, but in sadness for what could have been and acceptance of what is. Benjamin, you are my only child. I raised you alone after your father died, sacrificed for you, supported you, loved you unconditionally. I always imagined that when I died, you would inherit everything your father and I built together. That seemed natural and right. But over the past 2 years, you've shown me that you don't see me as your mother anymore. You see me as an obstacle between you and money you consider already yours. You've pressured me, threatened me, questioned my mental capacity, and weaponized my grandchildren, all in service of getting immediate access to assets I spent 49 years accumulating. Your fiancée, now wife, Vivian, called me senile in my own home and threatened to have me declared incompetent if I didn't sign over my property. And you stood silent, refusing to defend me. That silence told me everything I needed to know about where your loyalties lie. So I made a choice. I chose to leave the bulk of my estate not to someone who feels entitled to it, but to someone who earned it through simple human decency. Christopher Hayes, a young man who works at the Riverside Cafe, showed me more kindness and respect in a few months than you've shown me in 2 years. He listened to my stories without judgment. He treated me like a person, not a resource. He expected nothing from me and received my genuine affection in return. This is not senility or confusion or manipulation. This is a clear-minded decision to reward kindness over entitlement, respect over greed, genuine care over biological obligation. Sophie and Jackson will receive substantial educational trusts because they are innocent in all this and I love them dearly. I hope you'll explain to them why they received more than you did, and I hope you'll learn from that explanation. Benjamin, I wish things had been different. I wish you had been the man I raised you to be instead of the man Vivian helped you become. But we make our choices, and we live with the consequences. These are mine. And I make them freely, deliberately, and without regret. Your mother, Eleanor Catherine Whitmore. I set down the pen, my hands trembling slightly. Patricia read the letter carefully, then looked up with moisture in her eyes. This is perfect, Eleanor. Clear, reasoned, emotionally honest. It explains your motivations while demonstrating complete mental competence. No judge reading this could claim you weren't fully aware of what you were doing. Good. Because I want Benjamin to understand. Really understand. That his actions had consequences he never anticipated. That evening, I returned to Riverside Cafe for dinner. It was unusual for me. I typically only came for lunch, but I needed to talk to Chris. To tell him what I'd done, even though he wouldn't know the full extent until I was gone. He greeted me with surprise and pleasure. Eleanor. 2 visits in 1 week. Should I be concerned? Actually, I was hoping we could talk. Do you have a break coming up? For you? I'll make one. Let me tell Sarah. 10 minutes later, we sat at my usual corner table with coffee and Sarah's famous apple pie between us. The evening crowd was light, giving us privacy. Chris, I need to tell you something. And it might make you uncomfortable, but I need to say it anyway. His expression became concerned. Is everything okay? Are you sick? No, nothing like that. I'm healthy. But I've made some decisions about my estate, and you're involved in them. He frowned, confused. I don't understand. Over the past 3 months, you've shown me consistent kindness. You've listened to my stories, treated me with respect, never expected anything from me. You have no idea how rare and valuable that's been during a very difficult time in my life. Eleanor, I just treated you like a human being. That's not special, that's basic decency. Exactly. And apparently basic decency has become rare enough to be precious. Chris, when I die, and I hope that's many years from now, you're going to inherit the majority of my estate. His face went completely white. What? My house, my investments, most of my assets, they're going to go to you. My grandchildren will have educational trusts, but the rest goes to you. Eleanor, you can't, that's insane. We barely know each other. We know each other well enough. I know you're kind. I know you're genuine. I know you saw me as a person when my own son saw me as a bank account. That's enough. Chris stood abruptly, pacing away from the table, his hands in his hair. This is crazy. Your son, your family, they'll contest it. They'll say I manipulated you. They'll make my life hell. Probably. But Chris, I've documented everything. I've been evaluated by psychiatrists. I've created ironclad legal structures. And most importantly, I'm doing this of my own free will because it's what I want. You haven't asked for anything. You haven't manipulated anything. You've just been kind. But why me? Why not charities or organizations or? Because you remind me that good people still exist. Because in my darkest moment, when my own child betrayed me, you showed me that kindness isn't dead. And because I can't stand the thought of everything I built going to someone who's already proven he doesn't value it beyond its monetary worth. Chris returned to the table, sitting heavily. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. I'm not asking for gratitude or acknowledgement. I'm just telling you so that when the time comes, hopefully many years from now, you'll understand why. And so you'll be prepared for the fight Benjamin will inevitably wage. This is going to destroy your relationship with your son. Chris, my relationship with my son is already destroyed. He destroyed it when he chose money over his mother. I'm just making my peace with that and taking control of my own story. We sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, Chris spoke, his voice thick with emotion. My grandmother would have loved you. She always said the bravest thing you can do is refuse to reward bad behavior, even when that behavior comes from family. Even when refusing breaks your heart. Your grandmother sounds like she was very wise. She was. And Eleanor? Whatever happens, whatever your son tries to do, I promise I'll honor your wishes. Not because of the money, honestly, the money terrifies me, but because you deserve to have your choices respected. A year passed. Benjamin and Vivian's marriage was already showing cracks. According to Lauren, who kept me updated through the kids' visits, they were fighting constantly about money. The expensive lifestyle they'd been maintaining was unsustainable, especially with Benjamin's child support obligations and his refusal to cut back on luxury expenses. Vivian had apparently discovered that Benjamin wasn't as wealthy as she'd assumed. That without immediate access to my assets, they were actually quite ordinary in their means. The shine was wearing off. Meanwhile, my life had found a peaceful rhythm. Tuesdays at Riverside with Chris, Saturdays with Sophie and Jackson, book club on Thursday evenings, volunteer work at the library on Wednesdays. My days were full of genuine connection and purpose. Chris had been promoted to assistant manager at the cafe. Sarah had recognized his natural leadership and empathy with both customers and staff. He was thriving, building a life he was proud of. And I was happy. Genuinely happy in a way I hadn't been in years. Free from the weight of Benjamin's expectations and manipulation. Free to live my remaining years on my own terms. On the anniversary of signing my trust documents, I invited Chris to my house for tea. It was the first time he'd been inside, and he looked around with wonder at the Victorian details, the antique furniture, the photographs spanning decades of life. "This house is incredible," he said, accepting the teacup I handed him. "It must hold so many memories. 49 years of them. Some painful, but mostly beautiful. And Chris, I wanted to tell you something. The trust one created, it's not just about money. It's about believing that this house, these possessions, these memories will go to someone who'll appreciate them. Someone who'll see them as a life lived rather than just assets to liquidate. I would never. I know you wouldn't. That's why I chose you." We spent the afternoon looking through old photographs. I told him about Thomas, about raising Benjamin, about the life I'd built in this house. He listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions, helping me remember the good times alongside the painful ones. As the sun began to set, casting golden light through the stained glass windows, Chris turned to me with serious eyes. "Eleanor, can I ask you something? Do you have any regrets about your decision? About Benjamin?" I considered the question carefully. I regret that he became someone I don't recognize. I regret that his choices cost him his mother's estate. But do I regret standing up for myself, refusing to reward manipulation, and choosing to leave my assets to someone who treated me with basic human dignity? No. Not for a second. What if he changes? What if he apologizes and genuinely means it? Then I'll enjoy whatever relationship we can rebuild. But that doesn't change what he chose to prioritize or how he treated me when I needed his support. Chris, the greatest gift I can give Benjamin now is letting him experience the consequences of his choices. Maybe that will teach him something his mother apparently failed to teach him, that relationships matter more than money, and kindness is worth more than any inheritance. Epilogue, the message to you. As I sit here in my home office, writing the final entries in the journal I've kept throughout this journey, I want to talk directly to you, whoever is watching this story, wherever you are in the world. You might think I'm vindictive. You might think I went too far. You might believe that family is family, and children should inherit their parents' estates regardless of their behavior. But let me ask you this, at what point do we stop rewarding bad behavior just because it comes from family? At what point do we value ourselves enough to demand basic respect and dignity? At what point do we recognize that kindness from a stranger can be worth more than entitlement from a child? I spent most of my 70 years putting others first. Being the good mother, the supportive wife, the helpful friend. And there's nothing wrong with that. Generosity and selflessness are beautiful qualities. But they're only beautiful when they're met with gratitude and respect. When they're met with manipulation and greed, they become nothing more than weapons others use against us. So I made a choice. I chose myself. I chose dignity over obligation. I chose genuine kindness over biological entitlement. And I want you to know, it's okay to make that choice too. If you're in a situation where family members treat you like a resource rather than a person, you have the right to protect yourself. You have the right to change your will, to set boundaries, to choose who benefits from your life's work. You don't owe anyone your dignity. You don't owe anyone control over your own assets. You don't owe anyone the right to manipulate and threaten you without consequences. I hope my story reaches people who need to hear it. People who are being pressured by greedy family members. People who feel guilty for wanting to protect themselves. People who think they have to tolerate abuse because family is family. You don't. You deserve better. And it's never too late to take back control of your own story. Eleanor Catherine Whitmore lived another 12 years after writing these words, passing peacefully in her sleep at age 82. True to her word, Christopher Hayes inherited her estate, which he used to establish a foundation supporting young people aging out of foster care. Benjamin contested the will but lost when presented with Eleanor's extensive documentation. Sophie and Jackson received their educational trusts and maintain close relationships with Christopher, whom they consider family. Benjamin and Vivian divorced 3 years after Eleanor's death. Eleanor's story serves as a reminder that our lives, our assets, and our legacies are our own to control, and that sometimes, the greatest act of love is teaching consequences to those who refuse to learn them any other way. Now I want to hear from you. What would you do in Eleanor's situation? Have you ever had to set boundaries with family members over money or inheritance? Drop a comment below with your thoughts, and don't forget to tell me what country you're watching from. Let's keep this conversation going. Thank you for staying with Eleanor's story until the very end.